Hey there, ready for a deep dive? Today, we're stepping back in time to ancient Israel, like way back, to the time of King Solomon. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the building of Solomon's temple. And let me tell you, we've got a ton of fascinating details from 2 Chronicles. We're talking about an epic project here. I mean, this was a temple fit for a king, and not just any King Solomon, son of David. This was a big deal, a huge deal for the Israelites, and we're going to uncover every little fascinating detail we can. So what are you interested in? The history, the architecture? We'll try to get to it all.
One of the most interesting things about the temple is that it wasn't just a building, right? It was much more than that. It was meant to be a physical representation of God's presence on earth. It was a statement of power. And every little detail, from the materials they used to the exact dimensions, it was all symbolic.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? Just trying to imagine the sheer scale of it all. Like, take the bronze altar, for example. 2 Chronicles 4 says it was 30 feet long. 30 feet. And 15 feet high. And that was just the beginning. I mean, can you imagine the planning, the resources, the skill it must have taken to build something like that? But if you think that's impressive, wait till you hear about the sea.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't just some basin for washing up. This was huge. We're talking 15 feet across, made of bronze, holding thousands of gallons of water. I mean, it was more like a small pool, right?
Yeah, and remember, this was the Bronze Age we're talking about. To cast something that big out of bronze, that was an incredible feat of engineering. It really shows you how important ritual purity was to them.
And speaking of ritual purity, it's amazing how much detail we get about the temple furnishings. Pails, shovels, bowls, all made of polished bronze. They really went all out, didn't they?
Not at all. Ritual purity was everything in ancient Israelite religion. Every single thing used in worship, every little tool had to be cleansed according to very specific rules. These weren't just cleaning supplies, they were sacred instruments.
It's like how many religions today have rituals about washing your hands before a ceremony or something?
Exactly. It's about separating the sacred from the everyday. It's a concept that goes way beyond just one time or culture. You see it in secular settings too, like in scientific labs with all those strict cleaning protocols.
Yeah.
It's all about maintaining purity and control.
You know, it's funny because even today, don't you think people find satisfaction in having like a perfectly organized space or having, a specific tool for a very specific task? It's like this primal need for order and precision. Maybe we're not that different from those ancient builders and worshipers after all. But let's move on to the main event here. The arrival of the Ark of the Covenant. This is it, the big one, the chest with the 10 Commandments inside. Can you imagine what that day must have been like?
Well, picture this. The ark had been kept in a tent, basically. Ever since the Israelites escaped from Egypt and wandered the desert, it was in a tent, a symbol of God's presence with them, a reminder of their covenant. And finally, under Solomon, they built a permanent home for it. It was a huge celebration of their history, their faith, their identity.
And what a celebration it must have been. They sacrificed so many animals they couldn't even count them all, 2 Chronicles says. The sights, the sounds. Can you imagine the energy?
Oh, it must have been awe-inspiring, a moment those people would never forget, the culmination of generations of longing and hope.
But for all the grandeur and the spectacle, there's also a more human side to King Solomon. In 2 Chronicles 6, he gives this prayer of dedication. It's really something. Here he is, this powerful king, surrounded by all his opulence, and he's acknowledging that even the heavens are too small to contain God.
It's true. Solomon's prayer, it's not just about a building. It's about something much bigger, something much deeper. It's about the relationship between humanity and the divine. He asks for blessings, for forgiveness, for guidance. He recognizes his own limitations, even as he's celebrating this incredible accomplishment.
You know what I find really interesting? He asks God to hear the prayers of everyone, even foreigners. That's pretty inclusive, especially for that time period, don't you think?
Absolutely. It tells me that Solomon understood what the temple was really about. It wasn't meant to be some exclusive club only for a select few. It was a spiritual center meant to bring people closer to God, no matter who they were, no matter where they came from.
It's amazing how these ancient texts, they really give us a glimpse into these universal values,
That's true.
Like, it reminds us that they weren't just these people obsessed with rules and rituals. They were wrestling with some of the same big questions about faith, about humanity, the same questions we're still asking today. And speaking of details and symbolism and all that, we can't forget about those oxen. 2 Chronicles 4, it mentions these figures of oxen. They're holding up the giant bronze sea. 12 of them, actually. What's the significance there, do you think?
The oxen. Right, so it wasn't just a random design choice. Remember, in ancient Israel, symbolism was everywhere, right? And the number 12, huge significance.
The 12 tribes of Israel, right?
Exactly. The descendants of Jacob. It was fundamental to their identity.
So by putting these 12 oxen under the sea, it was like they were linking this holy space to their own heritage, their history.
Yes. Weaving those stories, those beliefs, directly into the very fabric of the temple.
It makes you wonder, in our modern world, with all our abstract thinking, do we miss out on the power of these kinds of symbols, these stories, these physical reminders? But let's get back to some of the other details about the temple. Chronicles mentions these special basins that were used just for rinsing things, used in burnt offerings, which, seems a little redundant with the giant sea right there, don't you think?
Well, it shows you just how precise and careful they were about their religious practice.
Mm-hmm.
Different rituals, you see, they had different levels of, sacredness to them.
Okay.
Burnt offerings, though, those were especially important. The smoke from the altar rising up, it was thought to carry their prayers, their offerings, up to heaven, you see?
So it was more than just physical cleanliness. It was about maintaining a spiritual separation as well.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how they layered these meanings onto these objects. And speaking of layers, we can't forget about the sheer amount of bronze used in the temple. Chronicles mentions that Solomon made so many of these bronze utensils, these tools, they couldn't even weigh it all.
That's right. It tells you a lot about the resources Solomon had access to. Remember, this was a time when bronze was extremely valuable, a real symbol of power and wealth.
So they were really sparing no expense.
No, they weren't. The temple, it was more than just a place of worship.
It was about creating this monument to their faith, their identity as a people.
Exactly.
But for all this talk about grandeur and spectacle, did people actually come here to worship regularly, or was it mostly for special occasion?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what made Solomon's temple so important. Yes, it was the site of major festivals and ceremonies.
Right, of course.
But it was also meant to be a place where ordinary people could come and connect with God, in their daily lives.
So it had this dual purpose, a
Exactly.
symbol of national pride, but also a place for personal, individual devotion as well.
Precisely. And that duality, that's what made it such a powerful symbol for them.
It was a tangible, visible representation of their covenant with God.
A place where heaven and earth seemed to meet.
It's amazing how architecture can do that,
Really?
create that kind of bridge. Speaking of bridges, there's this one detail about the temple's construction that I find really interesting. 2 Chronicles 4 mentions that the bronze furnishings were all cast somewhere else entirely, not in Jerusalem, but on the plain of the Jordan River. Why go through all that trouble? It just seems so impractical.
Well, it shows you how even the seemingly mundane parts of this project, they were infused with meaning.
Right. It wasn't just about convenience.
No. Transporting molten bronze over that distance.
Yeah.
Logistically, a nightmare.
It would have been a huge undertaking.
It was a testament to their skill, their dedication, their reverence for this project.
It was a conscious choice then to show the effort, the devotion involved.
Exactly. Every single step of the process was intentional. It was an act of worship in itself.
It's interesting, this balance they struck between this grand vision and this meticulous attention to detail. All these descriptions, of the golden furnishings, the altar, the lampstands, even the tongs, they really thought of everything.
They did.
What was the significance of using gold?
Again, it wasn't just about aesthetics. Gold, it represented purity, divinity, the eternal nature of God. Using it so prominently in the temple, it reinforced this idea.
That this was a place where the divine and the human world met.
Exactly.
What a powerful, thought-provoking concept.
It was a way of life, really, imbuing even the most ordinary things with a sense of the sacred.
Makes you think, doesn't it, about finding those deeper meanings in our own lives, seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, the scale of the temple, the details, but you mentioned something earlier about how this story, even though it's ancient history, it still has relevance for us today. What's one final thought, something for our listeners to chew on?
Well, we've talked a lot about the magnificence of Solomon's temple, the sheer size of it, the effort that went into every detail. But the text itself, while it celebrates this accomplishment, it also offers a subtle warning, I think.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
In Solomon's prayer of dedication, he acknowledges that no physical structure, no matter how grand, can ever truly contain the divine. It's not about the building itself, you see.
It's about something more internal.
Exactly. It's about the sincerity of the heart, the purity of intention.
So true worship isn't about outward appearances, it's about cultivating something deeper.
Exactly. And that's a message that speaks to us even now, thousands of years later. It's a challenge for each of us to ask ourselves, what are we really building in our lives?
Right. Are we focused on the outside or are we building something stronger, something more meaningful within?
That's the question.
Wow, that's certainly something to think about. It's incredible how even a deep dive into ancient history can lead to such relevant insights for today.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of Solomon's Temple. We hope you've enjoyed exploring this ancient marvel with us. And until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.